At this time on Monday mornings, we take a few minutes and we chat with the publisher of Idaho Weekly Briefing, Randy Stapilus, and he gives us a rundown of various events, not just the political, but other things that are going on around the state of Idaho that are often of interest to our listening public. It's 7, coming up on 8:43. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And Randy, first of all, welcome back to the show.
Well, good to be here.
You had when I was reading the lead, I guess today, you mentioned how quiet it was with Thanksgiving last week, and referenced it might not be a bad thing for a change to have a little bit of downtime in Idaho because it has been quite newsworthy. We've had some sad stories. We've talked about tragic stories, the political stories, and a lot of gnashing of teeth always going on there. And all of a sudden, people got a chance to catch their wind. I guess that's a good way to put that.
I think that probably is a good thing. Well, Thanksgiving week is usually kind of a quiet time. Essentially, for a lot of people, it's about a 3-day week, so it doesn't really, there's not really a lot of time to do a lot of different things. But still, news marches on, activity marches on, and there's some things here and there.
When we talk a little bit about calm, one thing I picked up on right away, you were writing today about how, at least in the Republican Party, we have not seen a lot of insurgents coming forward like we did a couple of years ago. And you referenced Russ Fulcher was already well on his way to challenging Governor Otter in a primary. And and I get a lot of that being, listening to the audience here on a talk show. I get a lot of the people who are still, I guess the word would be disaffected. But it seems that there's a huge concentration coming up, at least among Republicans. I wouldn't call it unity maybe, but they're focused on that presidential election. And so we're not necessarily going to see a lot of those internal challenges coming up next year.
Well, it's too early to say, I think, whether or not there will be any at all. And I would be a little bit surprised if there wasn't somebody who filed, let's say, against Representative Mike Simpson. Because there has been somebody that has for several elections going back now. That wouldn't be much of a shock. But the difference that happened 2 years ago was that there was a campaign that had gotten started and entrenched really a full year before the campaign before the election day occurred in the primary election, and this year, there doesn't seem to be anything like that going on. There doesn't seem to be any long-term, really solid effort to do something like that. If somebody did do that in this next season, it would be a matter of wanting to kind of make a statement and make a point, rather than making a really organized effort to try to oust Representative Simpson. And that seems to be the case so far as I can see, for the most part, up and down the ticket.
I had an interesting conversation off air a few weeks ago with Janice McGinn about the possibility that she might be a challenger for Mike Simpson. I got the impression, though, that there's a lot to consider. First of all, when I worked on the eastern shore of the Chesapeake, the representatives from Maryland and Delaware had a short commute to work because, in fact, Andy Harris had a matter of a few miles to get to Capitol Hill. But if you're thinking about challenging in Idaho, and let's say you do win a seat, you're away from home, family, businesses a lot. Those are some factors that I think a lot of challengers are that they have to have a serious discussion with the family. It's not an easy decision to make, is it?
Well, you're exactly right. When you look at what the job is like to serve in Congress from a western state, especially a western state that doesn't have a major hub airport, which Idaho doesn't. Boise's airport has good connections to a lot of places, but it's still going to be a stop or two away from D.C., and it's going to take quite a while to get there. And you wind up because of the necessities of having to be back home. You don't want your constituents to feel that you've forgotten them. So you go back home very, very frequently. You have to do a lot of fundraising, and the various things that you need to do mean that you're on the plane a lot. A lot of U.S. House members from from the western states are on planes, going and coming, making round trips once a week or close to it, and it's kind of a difficult and challenging way to live. And you're right. If you have a family that's probably back in the home district, you're probably just batching it in D.C. And it's not really. People probably imagine kind of a glamorous lifestyle in that sense, but a lot of it really isn't.
I know a lot of the younger members of the House in the past few years, in fact, have been living in. They rent rooms in boarding houses and sleep on cots, and it's it's
They
because it's
sometimes
expensive
do
to
that.
live
There
there.
are those that sleep in their own offices. That has happened from time to time.
Yeah, yeah.
In fact, I saw one report that indicated that the new House Speaker, Paul Ryan, frequently does that. Sleeps in the Speaker's office.
Tulsi Gabbard, who is from Hawaii, she went to Paris last week for one of the remembrance services, and it struck me she may have actually flown to Asia and then on to France because she would have had to take a flight from Hawaii to L.A. to Washington on to Paris or New York on to Paris. So it is a challenge for people, and I guess because the original people who put this capital city together didn't really take into account it was going to stretch sea to sea before it was done. Kansas might have been a much better location.
Someplace a little bit more inland that would have been a little bit more central. That's true. Well, of course, at the time that it was chosen, it was chosen for its centrality among the 13 states that were then there. But it was picked because it was kind of a midpoint from north to south. But now the midpoint from east to west would probably be more relevant. But on the other hand, of course, the people from that day and age would probably laugh at our grinding of teeth that it actually takes several hours to travel 3,000 miles.
Oh, sure, because they were doing it in carriages or horseback and
Yeah,
much tougher journey. It's 8:49. Randy Stapilus, our guest from Idaho Weekly Briefing. It's 7 at the studio this morning. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Randy, for people who'd like to actually take a look at the weekly briefing, where would you send them?
I would send them to www.ridenbaugh.com. That's RIDENBAUGH.
For a lot of us, we're relative newcomers to Idaho. I was a little surprised when I was reading in the briefing that we don't have, there's not a standard for full day kindergarten, and Idaho is one of only a handful of states that doesn't require it, but there are now more and more districts talking about perhaps instituting it if they can find a way to afford it.
It's starting to grow a little bit. It's Idaho. Idaho was one of the later states to add kindergarten in as kind of an institutionalized thing. That was in the mid '70s, about '75, I think. But it has always been in the years since then. It's been part day for the most part, and there are just a few districts that are, and they do seem to be growing. The districts that are experimenting with trying to add the time that kindergarten does include. Coeur d'Alene's district, Central School District, seems to be kind of a state leader in this, and I think there are a lot of people in education that are looking at how well that does, what the funding situation looks like, what the results seem to be with educating kids, and what the results of kids going through that system seems to be. Do they enter, for example, first grade better prepared than students that have just been there for part day? So I think that will probably be looked at quite a bit.
It would add, if we ever went to some sort of mandatory system and then decided on a full day, it would obviously add a lot of money to costs. In fact, you cited one school district where it's really coming down to just a matter of space. They wouldn't necessarily have the rooms available for all of the new students.
Yeah, if you tried to do that, if for example, not that this would happen, and I'm sure that it would not happen, but if for example the legislature were to declare next year that the state will have day-long kindergarten in all school districts, you would find a budget crisis in a lot of school districts because it would cost more money, and there would be some real issues with that. I imagine that if this goes along, as school districts find ways to make this happen, they may find some efficiencies. They may find ways to sort of build it into what they already have, but it's inevitably going to cost somewhat more. There's no way around that.
Some details today about, and of course, this being such a big agricultural state, and I'm sure that when we've been hearing about trade deals and other efforts, some of the products we would be selling would be milk-based products, not only around the country but all over the world. And there's a discussion going on right now, and I guess Mike Crapo is involved with this about some of the differences between state lines when it comes to shipping milk and how it creates some barriers for people who are trying to ship across state lines. We could be looking at some changes in law that would benefit our dairy farmers.
I think that's probably true, and I wouldn't be surprised if they find some pretty good alliances from other dairy states. Everything from Wisconsin to California to other states that do a lot of dairy. People don't tend to think of Idaho, or at least I think a lot of people don't think of Idaho as a major dairy state, but it sure is, and you're right in the middle of it in the Magic Valley. It's very major industry now, and this particular change is really kind of subtle and not really large scale. It would simply add milk to the list of products that would be considered kind of non-divisible, that there's a recognition that you can't break up a shipment easily in order to just cut the weight of the trucks that are going down the road, and that would make it a lot simpler for dairy farmers and dairy producers to send little bit larger shipments down the road. It doesn't increase the size of the trucks, but it might increase, particularly in heavy dairy places like the Magic Valley. It might increase the number of big trucks going down the road a little bit. So I suppose you'd probably want to look a little bit at the road rebuilding costs, or if any, that might come out of that. But by and large, it's probably kind of a subtle change, and likely a lot of people aren't going to notice it. But Idaho is anything that affects dairies is a big deal for Idaho, certainly these days. A generation ago, that wasn't so much true, but it sure is now.
Coming up on 8:55, we've got a couple of minutes to go. Randy Stapilus is our guest from Idaho Weekly Briefing on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. On Top Story with Bill Colley. There's a discussion, too, coming up about some changes in sales tax, and we could see that perhaps even going to a vote next year.
That's possible. There's the League of Women Voters is looking at putting together or is trying to launch an initiative that would reduce the state sales tax from 6% to 5%. And that's one part of it, but there are a lot of other elements that allow for that to happen, and actually would allow for the change to raise more money. Those include eliminating a number of exemptions, and the legislature has made a practice of adding exemptions to the sales tax frequently over the years. When the sales tax first came into place, there were not very many exemptions to it. Services generally were exempted, and there were a few other things, but not very many. And the list has grown pretty long. And attempts to whittle it back so that the sales tax could raise a little bit more money have generally failed at the legislature. In fact, I think they've about all failed, and there have been many attempts. So this is it's kind of the classic initiative sort of thing, in that we have people that are looking at a legislature that does not want to do something that seemingly a lot of people in the voting public would like to do. I guess they may get a chance to see just how popular the idea is. It will certainly be fought by a lot of the people who have the exemptions.
I can see that. Randy Staples, before we wrap up today, for people again who would like to check out Idaho Weekly Briefing, what's the web address?
It is www.ridenbaugh.com, Bauch.
I'll be chatting with you again in a few weeks. You'll be chatting with Steve Millington over the next couple of Mondays. So we'll look forward to chatting with you again, but I hope you have a great couple of weeks.
Well, you too. Have a good season.
Hey, thank you very much. Randy Stapilus joining us this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Randy is the publisher of Idaho Weekly Briefing. He was telling me off air that he and Steve had coffee not long ago, sat down for coffee. So two of them have a lot of institutional knowledge about what goes on in the state of Idaho. They should have some very, very good conversations over the next couple of weeks. It's 8. Bill Colley with you this morning. That's our high for the day. 8. Well, I don't know. Maybe it was warmer at midnight. But since I got up this morning, 8 is the hottest it's been. Coming up on 9 o'clock, news from Fox is straight ahead. Also, one more hour this morning. Bill Colley with you today on Top Story. Just wanted to make a quick mention of our friends at High Desert Meat Processing. If you need some meat now on the table for Christmas, good place to call. They process one animal at a time. What you bring in is what you get back. Owner Darren Van Horn has been in the meat business in Twin Falls for over 30 years. You can visit his business on Facebook and read reviews of other customers. Give High Desert Meat Processing a telephone call for all of your wild, but also your domestic processing needs, 734-9949. High Desert Meat does in-house smoking. Nothing gets shipped out. Specialty meats, jerky, pepperoni, summer sausage, breakfast sausage, brats, hot dogs, Polish dogs, USDA approved. Darren works closely with local beef growers and their programs to ensure quality, 734-9949.